The United States is taking a bold action to put our energy sector on a path toward net zero emissions by no later than 2050. Through measures like our Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, we're investing tens of billions of dollars in the scale-up of new technologies like offshore wind, advanced nuclear, and clean hydrogen. We're building a clean transportation sector, from expanding to electric buses, electrifying our government fleet of vehicles, to providing new tax credits for making and buying electric vehicles.
Yeah, those tax credits are kind of meaningless in a time when your purchasing power has been slashed due to inflation and the recessionary period. Welcome back to the program. Dana Loesch here with you. You can listen coast to coast. You can also watch the simulcast of the radio program, Channel 347 Direct TV, Facebook, and YouTube as well. This comes after, and we've talked about this, the big EV push, the leverage that I mean, when we were looking at without these requirements, the sales of EVs dramatically different. I mean, it's not going to accomplish a greener world. It's not going to do that at all. Our friend Alex Epstein, he is the author of Fossil Future, and you can also read him on Substack as well. And he's the founder and CEO of the Center for Industrial Progress. And he's proudly pro-fossil fuels, as we are as well. Alex, good to see you. Thank you for joining us. I just wanted to get your, although I can kind of predict it, I wanted to get your response to what the president was saying here, because he spoke just a little bit ago, earlier this afternoon, repeating pretty much the same thing that he just said in the clip that we played. It's unrealistic, and it seems more of has nothing to do with green, not at all.
I mean, I think to call it unrealistic is really charitable. I mean, it's just profoundly destructive and based on falsehood. So let's just take his latest measure, which is he's attempting to use the EPA to mandate about 2/3 of cars be EVs by 2032. So this is less than 10 years. We're at about 6% of current sales are EVs. And this is only with massive, massive subsidies and incentives to do it. They can only get it up to 6%. So they wanted to multiply 10x in the next 9 years. So first of all, this is forcing people to use something that's not good for them. If people were willing to choose EVs on a free market, that's amazing. That's great. But the fact that you want to force them shows that it's not going to be as good. And particularly for poor and middle class people who can't have an EV as their second car or third car, as so many wealthy people do, like they are being forced to have an inferior vehicle. And this is depriving Americans of the freedom of mobility, which is a great thing. So that itself is terrible. But you couple that with this is placing a massive new demand for reliable electricity on a grid whose supply of reliable electricity is declining. So this is absolute madness. You know, where I live in California, I happen to be in Dallas today, which also has its own electricity problems. But where I live in California, you know, Newsom announced no more internal combustion engines. And then 5 days later, literally, he said, don't charge your EVs because we don't have enough electricity now. Why don't we have enough electricity? Because of his anti-fossil fuel policies. He's been trying to shut down reliable power plants and replace them with unreliable solar and wind, which doesn't work because those can go to near zero at any given time, as Texas saw during the freeze. So it is an absolute catastrophe to make us incredibly dependent on electricity and then destroy the supply of electricity. And that's what this so-called green initiative is doing. So it's not, I mean, unrealistic. It's just profoundly destructive and dangerous, and we really should be sounding the alarm.
And isn't it true, Alex, that even if we did, just say arguably that we had the infrastructure in place and we were able to even do something like this, we still don't have enough materials in the planet itself to even support widespread use of, rare earth elements, green tech, the way that they're talking about, with the reductions that they want, the percentage of people that they want reliant on this. From everything that I've read, and I think you've addressed this too, correct me if I'm wrong here, but there isn't even enough of those resources to even facilitate that, to support that.
There's an important distinction here, which is there's not enough available resource in terms of reserves and what's possible on a near-term scale. So if you did like an MRI of the Earth, there is very likely enough of all these materials somewhere in the Earth, but you don't get access to things because they exist somewhere in the Earth. You have to actually have a way of getting them economically. And even they're not economic, otherwise we wouldn't have to pay for them via taxes. But even at anything that's not totally insane, we have nowhere near the scale. So here's an important statistic. Like no major extractive industry, so something that's taking stuff from the earth, has doubled in a 10-year period once it reaches a certain size. This whole green revolution involves 10 plus forms of minerals doubling in a decade. And this is in an environment which is an anti-development environment. So Biden talked about that infrastructure bill, bipartisan. Well, part of the reason it was bipartisan is because it was still anti-development. They didn't change any of the anti-development policies like NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act. And Biden just recently banned mining in one of the most promising sites for all of these, quote, green materials in Minnesota. So we have an anti-development environment, and we're promising totally unprecedented, heretofore impossible levels of development. This is not a serious movement that wants a new form of energy. It's just looking for rationalization to destroy the energy that exists today, which is overwhelmingly fossil fueled.
I mean, I look at this. We're talking with Alex Epstein, whose book, Fossil Future, is a must read. It lays all of this out. I look at this honestly as just a way to undermine our national security and our energy sovereignty, for the lack of a better way to put it, and make us reliant upon China. I mean, that's, I can't think of, I mean, these are the steps that you would take if that was what your goal was.
They were, but I don't know if you've noticed this, but they pitch it as, oh, this is going to make us amazingly energy secure. Like, this is because we're not going to depend on Russia. We're not going to, yeah, but the dependence of us on Russia for oil and gas, let alone what's needed, which would be even less if we were more pro energy here, is nothing compared to the dependence of the whole so-called renewable supply chain on China. I mean, they can cut off huge parts of that supply chain and destroy it. They are controlling this stuff around the world. So it's fair to ask what is going on, because it just take destroying our grid and the security of our grid. What would you possibly advocate besides destroy the supply of reliable electricity and increase demand if you wanted totalitarian control over people's lives? It's one of the best ideas I've ever heard.
That's the way to go about it. And also, of course, we can't forget about the gas stoves. At first they said, yes, we're looking at this. We need to regulate these essentially out of existence. No, we're not. That's a conspiratorial talking point. But then, yeah, we are. I mean, when you hear people like Jennifer Granholm and some of these other lawmakers, that's exactly what they're talking about. I know you've spoke on this. I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on it, because as someone who loves to cook, I will never use an electric stove. They're trash. They're absolute garbage. Gas is the way to go. I will only use gas. I will cook on an open fire before I ever use an electric stove. I wanted to get your thoughts on this.
I mean, well, first of all, this anti-gas stove thing is a part of this, quote, electrification movement. So it's notable. Again, they're increasing demand for and dependence on reliable electricity, and then destroying the supply of reliable electricity. So every time I see one of these things, that's one thing that scares me even more, because it makes our electricity less and less reliable, and they have more and more control over just the use of energy in our lives. But yeah, if people check out energytalkingpoints.com, one of my websites, and you search gas stoves, I have all the details you could want on this.
You were the one, not to interrupt you, you were the one who also busted the study that they were using to try to undermine the safety of gas stoves, because they were saying, oh, they're so dangerous, and these are all the fumes and chemicals that they're putting in your house. But it's true that they literally did the study in a completely like sealed room with no ventilation, and that's what they used to substantiate that claim.
Oh, I debunked part of it. I'm not sure which debunking you're talking about, but I mean, so this is the thing. They had a study, and I believe it was something like they had some precise claim about this increases the incidence of asthma by something like 12.7%. Anytime somebody makes that claim about asthma, you know 100% that it's BS. Now, asthma is not a virus or bacteria in your body, right? It's a set of symptoms. So, and its causes are not very clear at all. For example, as pollution has gone down in many places, asthma has gone up. So the idea that just air pollution causes asthma, and it's that simple, let alone you can quantify it to fractions of a percent, this is nonsense. So you automatically know you're dealing with a charlatan. But here's the real way you know you're dealing with a statist charlatan. If they discover some actual danger of gas stoves, or at least gas stoves without proper ventilation, why don't they just share the information with you and let you decide to do with it what you please? Maybe it's, hey, you should ventilate your home more. Maybe it's a pretty small risk compared to other things, and you don't really care about it that much. You want to focus on other things. But notice whenever somebody thinks they need to use science to dictate your life, then they're almost always abusing science. They're using it as a means to statism versus as a means to inform you. And that was certainly the case with this pseudoscience. So it's no surprise it's pseudoscience if they're trying to use, quote, science to force you instead of use science to persuade you.
Yeah. No, I agree with that entirely. We're talking with Alex Epstein, whose book, Fossil Future, is a must read. Okay, last thing. this kind of going back a little bit to the China dependency, because obviously we have foreign policy concerns as it relates to China and Taiwan and shipping coming out, near South China Sea, et cetera, et cetera. We had this conversation on air earlier this week because I'm a huge World War II history buff, and after World War II, after Pearl Harbor, we had this manufacturing capability that was amazing. We were also energy self-sufficient. There were so many things that the United States could rely on itself to accomplish. And when I see us becoming beholden to the very geopolitical foe that we're supposed to be kind of standing off against in the Pacific, I wonder what the future of the United States is going to be if we have to be beholden to these opponents, these ideological, et cetera, opponents like, China or Venezuela or Russia for, dirty oil and gas or for rare earth elements, without the, refinery capability and the extraction capability here because of this administration. If this doesn't course correct within the next election or so, Alex, where do you see this going?
It's a really scary situation. I feel like we're in one of these situations where you look back at history and you think, what were they thinking? Like, this was obvious that there was a huge threat mounting and they did nothing. So you look at China as the explicit goal, so communist China, of being the world's leading superpower by 2049. And what are they doing to accomplish it? One of the things is they're seeking essentially total dominance of all critical minerals around the world, both their extraction and their processing. What is the United States doing? We are following this net zero idea, which is basically just saying, let's abandon our use of fossil fuels, even though there's no cost-effective alternative. So we're gutting our energy capacity. We're also more broadly opposing development. So we don't even have the ability to mine for, let alone process all of these different minerals that we're becoming increasingly dependent on. And then, of course, we're just getting in all of these cultural things and fixating on all these different kinds of things. And it's just what do you think is going to happen? And, of course, they're also focused on very advanced weaponry, this kind of thing. And then our military is focused on these PC things and also being net zero. The military needs a lot of jet fuel. There is no net zero way of having jet, and you should not be pursuing this. As I agree with Elon Musk on this. We should be absolutely focused on our defense for military. So China's purpose is becoming the world's leading superpower, and our purpose seems to be appeasing the sensibilities of the most irrational people in academia. And those two purposes, one will win, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, very true. Alex Epstein, you can find him on Twitter. You can also get his book, Fossil Future, and find energytalkingpoints.com, which I think you should have bookmarked because it is just an absolute wealth of information. Alex, so good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. Would love to have you back also because this issue is not going to go away within the next couple of years at least.
Anytime. Thanks a lot.
Good to see you.